Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Maureen O'Connor from Quilters Heaven in Northbrook, Illinois, and I am the Opinionated Quilter. If you have any ideas for content for future videos, please drop me a comment. Today's episode is number 77, and it is, how do we decide what's the best way to accomplish better construction in making our project? Before we get to that, I want to follow up a little bit on last week's episode. First, behind me here, I have the full-size version of the copy of a quilt that I had printed at Office Depot. This is Cindy Edgerton's Tall Trim the Tree pattern. It is no longer available. So I am going to use this as my pattern. I'm going to actually cut out each piece and sew them together. I don't know when I'm going to get it done, but when I do, I will be sure to share it with you. The other issue we talked about last week was the reversing on the foundation paper piecing. And I said I was having a hard time looking at my picture because it was reversed from the way it pieces out on the foundation paper. And I said, I think if I did it again, I would reverse my pattern pieces. Stupid me. All I had to do was reverse my picture, and I could look at a picture that was correct. Let's take a look. Here is what I was looking at last week. You can see at the bottom, the first double triangle here points to the left. If you look down at the actual project, it points to the right. So I took this picture, just had it flip on the computer, printed it out again, and here it is with now the first double triangle pointing to the right, which is the same way here. This is a new one from last week. I had that silly piece that was sticking out incorrectly, and I wasn't sure what I had done. I figured it out. When I copied my pattern piece onto my vellum paper, I didn't get the whole pattern piece onto the vellum. I only had a portion of it. Hence, the piece was dragged too far over to the right and it didn't extend all the way to the left. So it was out of place. So I made a new one, and I'm very happy with this one. It looks identical to me to this one. So that's it for the follow-up from last week on foundation paper piecing. Always have a copy of the picture the way you're piecing it. It'll make it much easier for you. Let's get to today's episode. While watching quilting videos, I came across a hunter's star by Moonkin Stitchery, and I will provide a link to the pattern. It's a free PDF from her website. And I love hunter's stars, so I watched it, and my first reaction was, love it for a layer cake. That's what it was. It was using the layer cake because it used the whole 10-inch square. And as all of you know, I hate waste. I hate taking a 10-inch square and only using 7 or 8 inches of it. To me, that's a total waste. So I watched the video. I liked it. And then I started to think about, you know, I've made all my hunter stars using Deb Tuckers methods. Which is the better way to go? And I thought about all the things that go into our decisions as to what project we're going to make, how we're going to make it, what's the best construction method. We always think about how much cost there's going to be in a project. We think about how much work we want to do for the person who's going to get it. We've talked about this before. We're going to put in more effort for our first grandchild than we would for an anonymous donation gift. So there's several factors that go into how quilters decide what they're going to make and how they're going to make it. And this is what I came up with do we like the Moonkin Stitchery method better, or do we like the Studio 180 design Deb Tucker method better? And I think the end result is what you want to accomplish. So you can take one person and say, she might say, well, for this project, I'd rather do it Deb Tucker. For this project, I'd rather do Moonkin Stitchery. How do we decide? So if we look at the pros on the Moonkin Stitchery, it's very easy cutting. Not that Deb's is difficult, but this is really a super easy method of cutting. I might add that it may not be quite as accurate. The fabric selection is done for you. That would be a pro for the Moonkin. It might be a con for Studio 180. And my favorite here, it uses the whole 10-inch square. Love that. The cons, it's to me difficult to get accurate cutting. And the reason is those stupid little pinked edges. Do you measure from the valley? Do you measure from the peak? If you start your 10-inch squares first, which I like to do if I've got bias edges, and of course the Hunter Star is all bias edges. So if you starch them, the size of your square changes. In fact, it changes more in one direction than the other. So you no longer have a square. You kind of have a rectangle. So that can cause some difficulties. Less latitude in fabric choices. Here's my Christmas Hunter Star, which this would be called a 3-color Hunter Star because it's red, green, and gold. Now, I do have 2 different greens. I do have 2 different reds, but it's still a 3-color Hunter Star. You can't really do a 3-color Hunter Star using a layer cake because there's going to be many, many more colors in there. We've talked about this before, and Karen Brown talks about it. Layer cakes are premium priced. Unless you're buying them at deeply discounted on sale, you're paying a whole lot more for the fabric in a layer cake than you would if you bought yardage. And the last thing that I found the most difficult when I practiced making the squares in the Moonkin Stitchery method is I had a really hard time squaring them up properly. And I'm going to show you that now. Real quick, I just want to show you how the squares are cut. And it's all in her PDF pattern. And you cut first from corner to corner. And then you cut a 2.5-inch strip. Am I at 2.5 there? No. Okay, 2.5-inch strip off of each triangle. And then you cut a diamond shape off of each end of these. So you just follow the diagram in the pattern, but it's again 2.5 inches. And this is where I have trouble, is where am I lining up this line? Because there's the peaks of the pinked edges and there are the valleys. And I really would want a 45-degree line on here. And there's none really close on this ruler to get an accurate diamond shape. But there's one. You do the same thing over here. And you keep going around 1, 2.5, and getting all of your diamonds. So it's quick. I stacked 2 You could probably stack 4 if you wanted to. But I'm not certain how good my angles are because it's all based on how well these are cut. Well, if I don't start with a real square and I go corner to corner, are these really accurate 45 degrees? I don't know. But let's get to the other issue that I was talking about, which is squaring up. The sewing's pretty easy. As long as you've got really an accurate 1/4 inch seam allowance. But the squaring up, it just says square it up. So if I take my ruler and I know I want to square it up to 8.5. Well, let me put this way so that I can put my 45-degree angle down the seam. You can't just put your 8.5 inch line here and your 8.5 inch line here and cut off on these two sides because the center isn't centered. And even if you know on your ruler where the center is, there's no center here marked. You'd have to somehow measure and mark a center. So on the one that I did, I just eyeballed it. So you'd probably see I got kind of even amounts. So you could cut, turn it, cut again, which is what I did on this one. And I'm about 1/8 of an inch off. The way I found out I was 1/8 of an inch off is by just measuring from here to the edge and here to the edge. And then I thought, well, what if I laid Deb Tucker's ruler on top of it? Would that help me at all? And I tried that. And it does have an 8.5 inch mark, 8.5 inch mark. My line is on the center. And you can see how off this is versus this is. Now, these are not the same size diamonds that are in Deb's pattern, but it's still, these are not even. So while this looks good and 1/8 of an inch doesn't make a difference, too much of a difference for just this one block, if you think about putting many blocks together, if one's perfectly accurate, one's 1/8 of an inch one way, one's 1/8 of an inch the other way, it's not going to be easy putting these all together. My other complaint about this pattern, and it's really very minor, but it does always bother me about pressing directions. And there are no pressing directions. But I know when I'm putting these two halves together that I want these seams to nest. So I either have to choose to press to the black or press to the white and stay consistent. And that's what I did so that they did meet up really nicely back here. But this method, you could still opt to do even with all its issues if you had a layer cake that you said, that's what I want to use. So there's really not a good way to substitute for a layer cake without using the layer cake. You can't use Deb Tucker's method on a layer cake. So just because I like Deb Tucker's way a lot doesn't mean that this isn't going to work for the project that you want to make. So let's go ahead and look at Deb's way. So Deb Tucker has 2 different rulers, the petite ruler, which I use more, and also the larger ruler. And you have different sizes in these. So you choose which one based on the size block you want to make. And the rulers have all the lines you need on them. So the pros for Deb Tucker's way, the first to me is the accurate cutting. And the image that you're going to see now is first of the trapezoid, how the lines on her ruler have you cut your trapezoid exactly perfectly. When I was showing you the Moonkin way, I said I wasn't sure that my angles were going to be right because I was starting with not maybe a real square, so my 45-degree line might not be right. You don't have that problem with Deb's rulers. The second image you see is of the diamond shapes also being cut totally accurately using the lines on her rulers. So you start off with perfect angles. Love that. And then at the end of the squaring up, the lines on her rulers give you all the sizes for that particular ruler. And I showed you before how I laid it on top of the Moonkin version. But if you follow Deb's rulers, you'll have the 5-inch lines you line up, or the 6 or the 7 or the 8, and it actually outlines the diamond shapes. So they're all perfect and they're all accurate. Everything was a little bit oversized cut to start with. So then when you use the lines on the rulers to trim down, you end up with totally uniform blocks. And that was my last point here, but I skipped over the center point, which is the unlimited fabric selection. You're not limited to one collection that is all matchy-matchy. You can do whatever you want. Now, the one behind me here, this is not matchy-matchy, but it is using one fabric in many different colors, and then I paired it up with a black and a white. So this would never be possible with a layer cake. And you can do whatever you want. The fabric selection is absolutely unlimited. I talked about before a 3-color hunter star. There's obviously the 2-color hunter star, and then mine, I have 5 or 7, I didn't count recently, different star colors. So you can really design your own project. So when you're deciding between which method you want to use, you have to pick the one that works for the end result that you want. I still think one's better than the other, but depending on the project, that might not be true. So the only con to me is that you need a ruler. If you're only going to make one hunter star in your whole entire life, it might not be worth it to buy the ruler. If you're like me, I make one and then another and then another, and then I say, oh, well, what about this color combination? And then I make another. So you can make quilts, wall hangings, table runners, so many options with these rulers. And if you love the hunter star, it's a really good investment. So what I'd like to leave you with is one method over another is not always 100% the same. One method can be better for one project, one method can be better for another project. Don't shut yourself off and say, this is the only way to do something. It goes back to the old thing of what I have said before about pressing your seams open or to one side. Some people say, I only press open. Other people say, I only press to one side. To me, you press to one side when it makes sense and you press open when it makes sense. Same thing with units or block construction methods. Use the method that works best for the project. So that's it for today. Until next time, happy sewing.